Please record your name. Conference.
Welcome, new person. Can I just ask who that is? We'll carry on. So, what we're going to try and do today, what I'm going to try and do, is I'm going to introduce you to driver diagrams as a kind of concept. I'm going to demonstrate how they're used with a sort of quite a simple example and then some more complex examples. Doing that, we'll go through some of the benefits of using them. We're going to talk about some key factors that you would, if you're going to use them, you want to take into account, particularly if you're using them with other people around. And then I'll sort of link them into kind of complex healthcare strategy development towards the end. Hopefully we'll get through all of that comfortably. So starting with just a brief introduction, because I know that neither of you have used this before. So the diagram looks roughly like this. So this is obviously a template rather than the real thing. And it reads from right to left. So it's essentially a kind of hypothesis. We know what we want to achieve, and we are hypothesizing that if we change something over this side in the system, we will be able to influence. Oh, that was not supposed to happen. Influence things that are happening over in the middle. The drivers, which will change will drive something, which will drive something else, which will drive an improvement. It's hard to understand that when you look at just a template. So we'll move on to a real example, but just to make it clear, the arrow goes from right to left on this. And just to describe a little bit more kind of clearly what this is all about, it really is a tool. Okay, it's a process you go through or a tool you use to engage people in constructing a strategy, breaking down really difficult problems, complex problems into kind of smaller, addressable understanding where the system sort of fits together, and I'll give you some examples of that later on where the arrows get really complicated. And the nice thing about it is that you get this very kind of straightforward visual diagram which you can then use, and you can use it to adapt to problems as you go along. So let's move on to actually demonstrate one, which will start to demonstrate some of the benefits as well. So I'm actually in my belly at the moment as I'm sitting in the office, and not, but then anyway, imagine what you want to do. This guy, you can imagine, probably wants to lose a bit of weight. So he has to define aim. We'll talk a bit about aims later on. In the 2 stone weight loss in 6 months, which is probably achievable. Quite hard, as we know, but you know, achievable. And just think how you might try to lose weight, and just throw ideas around in your head. And I'm going to go and give you an example of how you might break this down. So, talk about the primary drivers now. So this is the first line on the diagram, and essentially, when you try to lose weight, you can either reduce the amount of calories you take in, or you can increase the calories you burn off. If you do this example with doctors, they say things like chop off a leg, or take diuretics and this kind of thing. I don't recommend either of those things as a way to lose weight. So keeping it simple, you either take calories in or burn more calories out. Now, like that, breaking this down into primary drivers, I think, is probably the most useful part of this tool, because it's a way of breaking down a problem and making it more logical, or giving a logical approach to solving it. Now, the next step that we recommend, think of some specific things that you could do. So some simple ideas. How would you actually lose some of this weight? And let's have a view. It's a fairly random selection. You could have different ways, 1,000 different ways that you could lose weight. So we just throw them out there. We usually recommend doing this with post-it notes. And then you look for ones that kind of have similar themes. So I've done this for you by colour, and you see that some of these are related to alcohol, or to the type of food, or to exercise. So what that is to do is to actually sort of to group these and to define them. And you can see, so here's some drink alcohol over here, these two, and you can see the colour themes, being more active in the day, or doing sports, slightly different things. So group them. Now there's no right or wrong. The themes are what you think the themes are, and that's good enough. And then if we take what we've just done and align that in a driver diagram, so you can see the colours are still there, and we've lined these up by the primary drivers, so you're either reducing calories in or increasing calories out. So that becomes quite a useful categorisation of the possibilities that you have to try and lose weight. I use this example with patients. I'm actually a GP half-time, and I think it's really helpful because all the time patients sort of think, if I lose weight, I just need to join Weight Watchers, or I'll just stop eating chocolate or something. They kind of forget that there's a whole load of other options available to them. So let's just conceptually think about the benefits of using this type of tool. So you've got it up, you've generated your set of options and you categorise them. And the nice thing about that is that you can then prioritise. And you say, well, what should we do first? Where do we start here? And there's lots of different ways, and we'll talk later about where you can prioritise. But once you prioritise, of course, start thinking about how am I going to know if I succeed? What am I going to measure? And you can measure at any stage of the diagram. So in fact, we thoroughly recommend and almost insist that you should be measuring at every level. And on the right-hand side, you'll be measuring sort of process. So are people doing what they said they were going to do? On the left-hand side, you're hoping to see some outcome improvements. Okay. Once you've decided that, get on with it. Get started. So you prioritise. You say, okay, I know I'm going to start. I'm going to try one or two different things. In this case, I've suggested that you'd want to try something that reduces calories in and something that increases calories out, which seems like a sensible approach. Because you're taking half your opportunity if you only do one of them. And once you've got started, the nice thing is if something works for you. So, for example, taking the stairs, turns out you've injured your knee, you can't get up on the stairs easily, but maybe you'd be able to do something else. Maybe going to the gym might still work, and do some some non-knee work, whatever. So you've made supply of alternative options if something doesn't work. So if you're measuring it and you find there's no benefit or it's just impossible, you can try something else. If you try something and it works quite well, there are still other options that might improve things further. So fortunately, this buying only one sandwich instead of two, well, that works and weights come off. But actually, what about instead of a yogurt fruit for dessert or something like that? So you build on top of success, okay? So kind of continual improvement. So, last point, we've got the wrong heading on this slide. This should say shared learning. And because it's a visual representation, you use it as a kind of guide for people about what's been going on, and people can kind of keep referencing back to it. Then the thing is that you can actually almost use it as a prompt for people to ask, what's been going on, what have we done, how do we get on with that project. So the tool itself doesn't share the learning directly, but it's almost like a prompt for you to do so. So a reminder, so that's a very quick run through of how we do a simple driver diagram, and this is the kind of template, just to remind you, and it reads from right to left. I started to introduce the tool and demonstrate how it's used. I've started some of the benefits. I've got some more I'm going to describe. Any questions at this point from either Harriet or Jackie or anyone else on the call?
No. It seems fine. I was surprised it started from the right to the left.
I know. I almost think. So actually, I forgot to say that the driver diagrams were first developed by the Institute for Health Improvement in the States, and the worst example is actually their example, a guy called Bob Lloyd's example, and they started right to left. I've got a sort of rebellious streak, and I'd really like to change it to left to right. And one of these we might do that because I think it would make more sense. But anyway, it's a good point. Right, so a few more of the benefits. So reasons that you might use driver diagrams, and I've got a whole here. So these slides we'll share with you, and you can
that would be
do them in your own time. And the ones I've put in green here, I think we've kind of covered these actually. So we've talked about getting people to actually develop their strategy, getting more and more ideas of how you might achieve your change, prioritising, measuring what you're doing, survival. We've talked about all these things. So there's a few extra ones we're going to talk about now, which are a bit more about engagement, talk about the visual representation strategy, deconstruction of problems, and this is about silver bullet thinking and blind spots. So let's move on to talk about those. Silver thinking, if you know what I mean by this, but this is the idea that there's one solution to a problem. And it's quite a kind of prevalent idea, really. I think it's something human nature that we tend to want to find us on a nice, simple solution and just crack it with that. Now, unfortunately, life isn't always like that. In fact, when you get onto complicated stuff, it's probably like that. So let's use an example for that. This comes from one of our colleagues who's a GP, and in surgery, they, like every surgery in the country almost, were having a problem with access. This is a few years ago now. The very sort of vocal doctors who tended to sort of dominate meetings said, well, it's easy. I know what the answer to this problem is. We need to use telephone triage. That will solve our problem. And the unfortunate outcome to that was that after 6 months of quite a pain, they several months working up the prototype. They did it in one day.
Joined the conference.
Hello, welcome. Someone's just joined. Who have we got?
Emmanuel Legar, Constructor. Apologies, I'm late. Problem.
Okay, no problem. Arrived just as a refuse lorry has decided to put its engine outside our window. You probably can't hear us. You're welcome. We've shared the slide deck with you. Have you used driver diagrams at all in the past?
No.
Okay. What I'll do, I think I'll carry on as we are, and then when we get to the next sort of, for example, I'll try and sort of just do a basic explanation of what it is. If you go through the slide deck in your own time later, you will actually, it will make sense, I think. Okay. So, this example we're talking about here is about the benefits of driver diagrams and trying to avoid this idea that there's one simple solution to everything. And this is really that we're talking about use telephone triage. They upset the staff because they found it very difficult and they hadn't really been trained for it. They upset the patients because they weren't really warned that it was going to happen. And after 6 months, they actually went to the old system, having spent quite a lot of money, a lot of time, and upset a lot of people because it didn't really solve the problem. And if you think about this, so there's a really great quote actually from this guy H.L. Mencken, known as the Sage of Baltimore. And he said, for every complex problem, there's an answer that's clear, simple, and wrong. And that's an important point. So when you get into kind of complex strategy, when you're trying to change a system, it's very likely you're going to have one solution. This GP access problem again, we just ourselves a sort of smart aim down here, and telephone is definitely a potential solution. It probably will. It could. We've hypothesized it would have some benefits. But if you stop and think a bit further, there's a whole load of other stuff going on here. So pick up any of these. We've got sort of Skype consultations. We've got patient information, pharmacy, and other members of the team. Longer appointments for different conditions. So loads of different ideas that you can throw out. And I mean, this is just a selection. You'd probably get thousands if you asked enough people. And when we sort of categorize these in the driver diagram kind of model, this is just part of the driver diagram. I'm sort of a little bit of it. So triage over here, I would argue. So Emmanuel, the diagram reads from right to left, and it's a hypothesis saying if we implement telephone triage on the right here, then we will be posting patients more effectively, we'll be reducing conversion to face-to-face appointments, we'll be planning time better. And those things will actually contribute to what we think really needs to happen, which is a combination of increasing capacity and reducing demand. So if you want to improve access, really, you've got to do those two things. And we think that by doing this, we contribute to this, we contribute to this, we contribute to our overall aim. And we're going to measure it and see it works. But at the same time, we've got loads and loads, and there's a few showing, but there are actually obviously hundreds of different possible ideas that we can get running at the same time that would contribute to different aspects. So the telephone triage is a bad idea. It's not necessarily it's the wrong idea, but it's probably not going to be the sole solution, and it's going to probably need other aspects of planning around it. I think go back to that for a second. You can see here that we've got this deconstruction here, which how could we improve access? Well, we could either reduce demand, or we could increase capacity. For me, this is where driver diagrams get really useful, because actually when you manage to crack your problem into kind of a useful subdivision that helps you think more effectively.
Has joined the conference.
Well, new person, can I go?
Can you hear me? Tom.
Yep. Great to hear from you. Okay, so I don't know if you can see the screen, but we're just at the point of the trick example. I'm going to move on now.
No worries, thanks.
We're talking about deconstructing problems. So if we take weight loss example again, break down the problem into reducing calories in or increasing calories out, that's a different way of thinking about the possibilities that are open to you. And I almost always, when I use this example with patients in my role as a GP, I almost always find that they've only thought of one of the possibilities when they're thinking about what they could do in the next few months. They can't think about, it's not that they conceptually don't realise that they might want to exercise more as well as eat less, but they don't tend to do two things at once. And I think, so they trick. So it's that deconstruction of the problem that's really useful. And let's use another example here. So imagine that you might want to reduce your staff workload. Most of us would like to do that. Conceptually, it's helpful if we start thinking in terms of reducing the tasks, because that will reduce the workload, or doing those tasks more rapidly, more effectively. And those things actually are quite different in terms of the type of changes you might make to make that happen. Some changes will be similar and some will be quite different. And I think it's quite possible that you might sort of forget the other possibility. You might focus in too much on streamlining and forget about getting rid of stuff, or the other way around. For me, it's this breakdown, and we're going to do some more examples of this at the end of the session if we get time. And I think the other thing to say is that this is what people find difficult, actually. Some people like working from left to right on the diagram. They like kind of cracking the problem open. Others find it much easier to come up with lots of ideas, which they then organise into a sort of driver diagram from working from right to left. It doesn't really matter which way you work, but I think this breakdown here between the aim and the primary drivers is very important. I'm going to make just a quick point about avoiding blind spots. So this is this idea that actually when we come up with ideas for improving a system, we get blind spots. We tend to, talk to other people who think it like us, so there'll be an element of groupthink. And it's easy to miss something that could be quite important. So let's use an example. Imagine that we're doing our driver diagram again for weight loss. So hypothesize that, the changes over on the right-hand side are going to drive us over towards the left and towards our aim. To get this breakdown, calories in or calories out, we've got to change. Gone forward. What we do when we find that when we categorise the different options down here, taking the step which is sort of known, it doesn't really fit anywhere, and actually suddenly we'd well, there's another way of getting calories out other than just doing sport, and suddenly we get a whole new second driver line. So these here are kind of secondary drivers, all that's worth, of being more active during the day. And suddenly we get more ideas about being active during the day, and I could probably think of 10 or 20 just off the top of my head of things you might do during the daytime. If we didn't do this process, we might miss that completely, and we miss the opportunity to improve our performance and therefore reach our goal. And there's a quick here about engagement. So usually driver diagrams are run a session, the tool is used in groups. You certainly use it on your own, and I do use it on my own for cracking problems, but it's always more powerful when you get a group of people together, and there's something very evolving about it. People get really into it, they get energized, enthused, they get excited by the possibilities. And I think that one of the reasons is that we tend to do this with post-it notes, and post-it notes are obviously great because you can move them around on a big piece of paper or on a wall to create the driver diagram. But for me, the really powerful thing about the post-it note is that everybody's post-it is equal. So whatever your status in the hierarchy of your organisation, ideas are just as important as everyone else's. Really powerful, different way of doing things. So I don't know whether you can sort of imagine how this would work from what I've described so far. But one of the steps is to just literally get people to write loads of ideas onto post-it and then share them and talk about them and move them around. And it really does involve me. I've used it a lot in my own practice. We've got a kind of traditional hierarchy in many ways, which is just historical. And the first time I've seen some of the people really engaged in conversations about improvement, so it's been fantastic. Okay, so I think that we've now done a reasonable job, hopefully, of introducing the tool and demonstrating how it's used at a fairly basic level. Excuse me. I've talked about some of the benefits. I'm going to talk, because obviously you guys are interested in this from the point of view of the complex healthcare system that you work within and that you're trying to change. And we think that the driver diagram tool is really useful for generating strategy, okay? But it doesn't necessarily, we've discovered when we've done this with groups, people don't always find it easy to kind of fit their concept of the driver diagram into the idea of strategy, and they don't necessarily find it easy to take the strategy out of what they create. So I'm just going to dwell on this for a few moments. So quick point, firstly, the classic thing everyone says about strategy, it sits on the shelf. Nothing ever seems to happen. You know, we don't really have change as a result of it. That's because, of course, strategy is difficult and actually implementation is very, very difficult. The thing about your driver diagram is it gives you lots and lots of very small ideas over on the right-hand side, all these what we call change projects or interventions or whatever you want to call them, you can get on with and get started with immediately. That's really valuable. And if you've got the right people in the room at the start, then they're all engaged, they're all excited about it, and they're going to crack on and get on with it. Another thing about strategy, so I like this quote. Okay? Every model is wrong, every strategy is wrong. Strategy, in a way, helps you learn what is right. People think you prove a strategy in advance, you can't. Now, this tells me is that when you write a strategy, you're writing your hypothesis. I think if we do X, we will get Y. That's what we've just described with a driver diagram. You're hypothesizing that if you intervene, if you make certain changes, you think you will improve certain aspects of the system that lead you towards your aim, okay, to overall aim. And if you think what a strategy document tends to be, it tends to be a series of chapters which will be key themes, which correspond often to the primary or secondary driver, so the middle part of the diagram, and will include a series of suggested actions to be taken, which will probably be a selection of the change projects on the right side of the diagram. So if you are writing a strategy, you're also writing your backup strategy for if your initial one goes wrong, because you've got a load of other ideas on the diagram that you can work with. So let's use a commissioning sort of level example. I doubt whether there is a CCG in the country that isn't interested in reducing emissions. Well, so this is actually something I did on my own, actually, and we've tested it out with various different groups of CCGs. So I thought about how would you reduce emissions? And I think you can boil down, in my view, to stopping people getting to the hospital in the first place, so they don't attend A&E, they don't attend MAU, they don't get referred in by their GP. This is obviously emergencies we're talking about. Or, once they're there, you stop conditions, so you prevent them actually being admitted over here to the hospital, but you turn them around within the 4-hour target or however long, and you get them back out. And for me, useful conceptual breakdown, because they're different things that you'd want to do. But go over to the right-hand side, what you tend to find is, of course, that it's complicated. So one of the ideas I thought was, well, what about if we had a social worker literally working in A&E 12 hours a day, trying to turn around these kind of complex folk who've got social needs, need to change their care package. That would sort of work. So what would it do? You know, be an element of sort of signposting. So it might be that actually patients who attend really just need a bit of help from a different service, not from healthcare. It's about helping families understand what needs to happen. Social worker could contribute to that. It's about sort of medical and social assessments, rapid assessments, something about package upgrades. And I would argue that these tend to act more on reducing attendance. These here tend to more on kind of reducing conversion to admission. It doesn't really matter. And you could pick these and see lots of different ways that would work across. I gave this example to a CCG in the south of England recently, and one of the delegates said, "That's interesting because we've got that project running in our local hospital, and no one uses it. Social workers completely just doesn't get any work because no one really knows it's happening, and they didn't bother to do any sort of education around it." And I think as an example of sort of Prioritise in the NHS. So I'd put a project on, don't really advertise it very well, don't measure whether it's really working, and then abolish it because you've got a sense that it didn't work, but you never really do it anyway. So you definitely want, as I've said before, to be measuring what's going on, measuring success at all levels, all the way across the diagram. Any questions on that? I'm going fast, I do apologise.
No, fine.
Okay. I'm just going to talk briefly about the concept that we've talked about in strategy. So when we started working on these very sort of large-scale problems, so CCGs we worked with would say something like, well, we want to improve urgent care, or want to improve mental health, or, so really quite big issues that they were trying to tackle. And what covered was that you can't really do one driver diagram for that. It's just too difficult. It's too complicated. It gets too messy. So we the idea of kind of nested driver diagrams, crack your big problem down into some sort of more manageable aims, so more specific aims, and then you do the driver diagrams around that. So I'm just going to show you conceptually what that looks like. And actually, while you're listening, have a think about this one. How would we reduce 1 week readmissions? So this is people bouncing back into the hospital. I've given a smart aim. I've made it 12%. It doesn't really matter what for this example. Have a think of how you might do that. What sort of primary drivers you might come up with for that. So here's a template driver diagram for one solution. Here's the one. So one thing around improving two aspects of the system. When you're putting them together, so I don't know how well you can see this on your screens, but over here we've got our kind of system challenge, our kind of huge, big problematical aim. And these now aims here become kind of sub-aims of that. Two driver diagrams kind of sit and they start to kind of overlap, and you'll see that actually a secondary driver is exactly the same on the two diagrams, for example. Or on the next thing, there'll be a primary driver that actually is shared. I want to sort of link the diagrams like this. You want to be able to prioritise even more, because things that hit primary driver, sorry, just over on the right side that are kind of driving into here, will tend to affect both parts of our aim. So I know this is quite conceptual. The idea would be just that you would prioritise those things, because you can actually have two of your current aims, two of your sub aims, if you like. So back to our example, so 1 week readmissions. I've been thinking about this in the last few days, and I thought that actually a useful of this might be to divide it into social and medical readmissions. So probably largely social, so patient goes home and can't cope, and probably largely medical, patient goes home and the condition they had is not fully controlled and they bounce back into hospital. And I think that's potentially a helpful breakdown. Maybe others, there are different ways to crack this. And just use a few examples. So things here that would be very much more on the social side, at the top in red. Got things at the bottom that would tend to be quite medical, some of our suggestions that we need to do. And then we've got some things that actually really hit on both. Something about the communication around discharge, and obviously that means both medical communication but also the social package. And then think about empowering the patient, the family, and the carers to know what they've got to do, and when would they come back to hospital, and that kind of thing. And obviously, speaking as someone who sees these kind of bounce back admissions, readmissions, I just do this really badly. And so the fact that this is kind of contributing on both sides makes me think, well, maybe that's a priority. Maybe that's something that we might focus on. I'm just trying to give an example here. This blue part is a diagram in itself, and if we actually did this fully, it would be much, much more complicated than I've drawn it. This red part is a driver diagram in itself, and so what you end up with is a kind of nested driver diagrams interlinking, and that's okay. it's difficult to do. It's conceptually hard, and it's fiddly, lots of arrows flying around. But you can crack really, really, really big problems by breaking them into subs and then doing multiple driver diagrams. And that's just trying to reassure you, because I think some people find that a bit challenging. Okay. Any questions on that bit? Because that was, I think, a bit of a rapid run through.
No, thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about some factors in success. So, and by that, really, I mean about how to create a useful driver diagram. I'm talking about implementation. Obviously, once you've got your driver diagram, you've got lots of ideas that you might then want to implement. Well, you would want to implement some of them, of course. We're not to that point. It's really just about generating a good strategy, a good driver diagram. There's something about the practicalities, okay? So there's 10 steps. You can look at these, obviously, when you get the slides, and we're going to just run through them one by one now. So the first thing is check the right people in the room. So in experience, when these things don't go so well, it's because we haven't got a broad enough range of, well, one of the reasons is we haven't got a broad enough range of people. And the people invite patients, and so you end up sort of saying, so what do patients feel like about this? And is that, would that work for them? And how would they feel at that point, that kind of thing? Range of clinicians, though ideally, you don't just want just GPs or just midwives. If you're doing maternity, you want a mixture. You need some people who do the kind of support and the admin side of things, because they will see this in a different way. They'll have kind of a different lens on it, and and they'll help you not kind of glare errors, if you like. And then other people you might think about, obviously commissioners, providers who might actually have to do some of these, make some of these changes you're suggesting. The sector, so it's just about having enough people. And the one we haven't really made on those, it really helps if you've got senior sponsorship for this. So I said to you before, the engagement part of this, the posts are democratizing. Everybody's view is valid, but if you've got sponsorship from someone who's got a sort of exec level, or who really, has responsibility for the system in some way, that is very, very, very important. Partly because of what happens afterwards. Okay. We always start with our aim. If you don't get your aim right, we're going to do a driver diagram. You're not going to create a good strategy. I think it's kind of stating the obvious, really, but it's amazing how often we don't do very well. You could say, well, if you don't ask the right question, or if you try and answer the right question, you'll get the wrong answer. Rubbish in, rubbish out, that kind of thing. So what is your aim? Actually, I'm sure you'll know the kind of SMART acronym, and you can read that again later, remind yourself later, or look on Wikipedia, but it's about being really specific and something very measurable, and how long is it going to take. And hopefully all of the examples I've used, I've put in those kind of time boundaries and described exactly what we're trying to happen. And there's this point down here about connecting with your organisation's vision and values, because if you sit in a darkened room with a group of people and come up with a brilliant idea that actually is in a different direction of travel to your organisation, it's probably not going to actually get implemented, is it? So it's a simple statement, but worth mentioning. As I've already mentioned, this is the really difficult bit, okay? And I still find this really difficult, and it makes my head hurt. And I think experience that some of our delegates find this hard. My advice would be, if you're thinking about running a session to try and solve one of your problems, it's worth thinking about this in advance. If you possibly can, think about the aim and think about the primary drivers. So you've got almost straw man. I wouldn't share it with people. I would use it if you get stuck. So let's just do some examples here. So we've already seen this one from the telephone triage example. If you want to improve access, you can either focus on demand or capacity, and each one, you try to have a SMART aim even for the primary drivers. Okay. Another. So we talked about admin workloads. I've given you this example already as well. Reduce workload, you can either do it quicker or do less of it, and I think that probably is a pretty sort of exhaustive list. There's a bit more detail. Hospitals, we just talked this one. So again, we either reduce the attendance at the hospital, or we stop people who have attended already from being admitted. Here's one. This is a difficult one. I've been trying to do this in the last few days to have another example. So I thought staff satisfaction, and the list on the right here was just attempts, and I was kind of really struggling with it. I think okay. I think you could break it down like this. You can always use kind of structural primary drivers. You can think in terms of, well, what needs to happen from an IT point of view, what needs to happen from a kind of a human resources point of view, that kind of thing. But that's all like a kind of fishbone diagram in a way, and it's okay, it's fine. We use that. This one's better. So, how would you increase staff satisfaction? So the thing about making happier doing their work, and that will include things like making sure they're not doing pointless tasks. It will include things like making sure that the work kind of linked to organisation's values and ideally to the sort of staff experience and expertise and value and their own personal values. There's something about making people happy to be in the work environment. So there's obviously building. There's obviously something about working as a team and the fellowship side of things, making sure that the way they're expected to work fits their own personality, that kind of thing. Have they got the right equipment? And then there's another area which probably is often thought about by organisations, and there's something, it's like the skill of being happy. This is where things like mindfulness would come in, or CBT, or some form of, actually trying to help people understand what it is that makes you happy and what you do about it. And there's no reason why an organisation couldn't look at that. Actually, of course, some do. They have very good systems. So, came to this solution very recently. There probably are things I've missed out of this. But I think that breakdown helps us when we then try and sort of think about specific things we could do. Some people feel happier with a more structural breakdown. Okay, that's fine. But for me, it's something about trying to crack this problem open to kind of core issues, if you like. So, any questions on sort of primary drivers? I really do think this is a kind of key area. Have I made sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's move on. So we took this idea of just generating lots and lots and lots of different ideas, and this is where we think post-its coming really, really useful, because they are the same size, and it's this democratization idea. We encourage people to just write loads and loads very quickly. Okay. So one particular point I want to make is it's much better if a change idea is an action, so a sentence containing a verb. It's quite easy. People sort of get into the tend to say something like telephone triage as their idea. It's much more like develop the telephone triage skills of practice nurses, for example, or whoever. It's more specific. It's more, therefore, manageable. You can do it. One of the things that people often write on is they just write IT or workforce or something like that. It doesn't really help you because it doesn't actually what needs to happen. So you really need to think, what actually needs to happen here? What needs to change? What do we need more of? What do we need less of? I would say to people, crazy ideas are encouraged. Sometimes a crazy idea that will never happen can move you forward in your thinking. Well, personally, I like crazy ideas anyway. The ideal thing is everybody has a similar pen. They write in capital letters as lightly as possible, so you don't end up having people reading these ideas. What we then tend to get people to put them on the wall or on a piece of paper as quick as possible. We do something called post-it snap, which is a little trick to try and get them up quickly. So you get one idea up, and then anyone who's got anything similar, put it one. Do another one. Anyone got anything similar? You put them up, and you can get 100 post-its up in no time. I'm doing it that way. And in that, you've also started to theme them into groups. So this is where we sort of generate the middle part of the diagram, particularly the sort of the secondary drivers here, which link from the right side, link the right side to the left side for you. And so you're devising these themes. You're sort of thinking, what are the themes here? What's the thing that joins all these different ideas together? And again, trying to frame that in a sentence. Much more useful if you can frame it in a sentence. This is the telephone triage example, and you can see by the colours that we've just started to see some things here. So I'm going to move quickly on because effectively this is what you're doing now. As you marshal these, as you identify these themes, you are marshalling the ideas into effectively usually secondary drivers. So as you start to create your driver diagram in the left to right or rather right left configuration that you've seen in the template, this process that you go through where you kind of group things together and define them. So we've got the colours, and then starting to see, well, some of these will increase capacity and some of these will reduce demand, and then you would line them up into a kind of diagram that would look a little bit like this, although a bit tighter. And when you do it on PowerPoint, it gets a bit tricky sometimes if you get too big, but there are other tools you can use to write them up. I talked already about prioritisation right at the start. You get on and do something, and just very quickly. So there's some questions here that are quite useful that you could ask. Also, a very simple tool. So you can use Pareto analysis. You probably about that, but that's this sort of 80-20 rule. You'll get 80% of your effort if you focus on 20% of things that happen most commonly. And you can obviously look that up if you need more. A prioritization matrix. We divide things up into a 2x matrix where one of the axes is impact. So do you think it's going to have a big impact? And that axis is doability. So if something is very easy to do but isn't going to have the impact, you're probably not going to do it. If it's going to have a huge impact but it's completely impossible, you've got your 5-year, 10-year plan, but you may not start it tomorrow. So go for things that have a reasonably high impact and are doable. Does that make sense? I should have drawn that out, sorry. But anyway, I think get that. So a reminder of how important these questions are. I talked about measurement already. Measurement is a sort of separate area in its own right, but incredibly important to try and measure what you're doing, to see whether you are actually going to achieve your aim. I'm not going to say any more about that now, but we had various other on it, and we can always do more. If you need more help, do let us know. And one of the concepts that you probably know about is this idea of PDA cycle. So getting started on a small scale change and trying to improve it as you go along, rather than dropping in a kind of finished idea into a system which, when it doesn't work, you kind of get stuffed. Try small scale, see if it works, tweak it, try it again, see if it works, tweak it. And very well with driver diagrams, because of course you've got all the ideas over on the right hand side of your diagram ready to go. Try it out, make them better as you go along. And then final point, we talked about this idea of sharing learning. So lots of organisations put the diagram up in their office somewhere, and people refer to it and use it as a kind of way of looking into all the work they're doing and helping them to share their learning. So those points are useful to reflect on. You've got them in the slide deck. What I hope we've done, introduce you to the tool and demonstrate it, explain the benefits of it. I think highlighting the key success factors means, for me, there's obviously these sort of very organisational factors about how you do it, how you fill the post-its in, and there's this key point about trying to get your primary drivers to be useful, and that just takes practice, really, and it's better to have prepped it before you start. And talked a bit about the sort of relevance of the diagram to creating a kind of complex strategy, and I hope that I've sort of demonstrated how that works. And I think that's it. So I've talked loads and very fast. Actually, I've achieved my objectives, our objectives. I'm very happy to be emailed if you've got any questions, and I'm also now happy to take any questions at all, which can go over the chat box on the WebEx, or obviously just shout out.
Thanks, thought that was really useful, and I'm really conscious that we've been a bit guilty of doing that thing of telephone management has been a real key focus in the work that we're doing, and I think we've lost sight of other things. So we were planning to do a bit of a review generally in January with all of our providers and stakeholders, so I think this provides a really useful structure for that, but I completely agree. I think the primary driver identification is going to be tricky, so I may well come back to you when we've kind of, when we're along with prep.
I mean, let's call, or I'll come down and see you if I've got because I think you're absolutely right. Getting it prepped is really, really important. I think the telephone trials thing is really interesting because I think it does work, but so many other things you've got to do at the same time. So
Absolutely.
Great. Look forward to hearing you. You've got my email there.
Brilliant.
No, that would be really helpful, but I'm keen to get a copy of the slides. How do I get hold of them?
Yeah.
How we send them? Sue's going to send them to you, Dolly.
Oh, because we've got an evaluation meeting the first week of January that I'm busy prepping for now, and I think one of the things I've missed off is really the aim.
Yeah.
So we need to just get that tightened up a little bit more before we meet, but that would be really useful to go through the slides again with the team.
If there's installation, however many times you teach this kind of stuff and talk about it, we all get stuff. It happens. So, but yeah, your aim sorted, that would be great. And again, do email me if you want any sort of, you want to just throw it back and forth. I'm very happy to do.
That'd be lovely. Thank you.
Okay, pleasure.
I thought that was very good too, and with regards to support material to explore that a bit further. When you mentioned the slides, and that's really useful. Are you aware of any? Sometimes the webinars get recorded, for example, and I'm assuming that's not the case maybe for this one.
Yeah, I recorded it, and we can send you that.
That's
so you can hear the beginning bit. Other things, so the IHI have got some very introductory videos on their website, including one on driver diagrams, which takes a slightly different approach. And we recorded some videos, Tom Margam, who's on the call, and myself, which I think are going to go live in January, hopefully. So I'm sorry they're not there yet. They're very similar to what we've just discussed, actually. But we definitely will have those up very soon. So Sue will make a note to send the link to you when they're up. As I say, similar material, but obviously you get to hear a different voice as well. And Tom is much better at it than I am, so you can learn him. And then the other thing to say is that obviously, so part of the sort of PMCF program, you all have development associates, and IQ. The drive diagrams is absolutely a core kind of competency for our faculty. So if you what do I do there? Need local facilitation, then happy to try and help with that. So just get back to us. My email address, haven't I? Hopefully you've all got it by now. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so really useful. Thank you for that.
So you're in touch with whoever your normal contact is. If you don't know who that is, then send me an email. So I think we're probably done with 3 minutes to spare. So I'm sorry I've talked so fast, but there you go. We've gone 3 minutes slower. Any last questions before we let you go?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And look forward to hearing from you for anything we can help with. All the best.
Okay, thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Yeah, likewise.
Bye.
Has left the conference. Has left